So today, the refuge in the three jewels, taking refuge number 7 of the models of discovering Buddhism. So you can take refuge from the point of view of small scope, middling scope, and great scope. So also our motivation we can have in accordance with either of those 3 motivations of the Lamrim. So think that in order to achieve the state of full enlightenment, I have to generate renunciation, and in order to achieve the state of full enlightenment, I have to depend on precision rebirths in future lifetimes. So for that purpose, I have to train in the stage of the path the Lamrim, right? And in order to train in the stage of the path of Lamrim, I have to understand all about refuge in order to go in a particular safe direction that leads me all the way up to Buddhahood. Yeah, so try to generate that motivation for yourself. And then in front is Sakyamuni Buddha, and surrounding yourself the sentient beings of the 6 realms and human aspects undergoing individual sufferings. And focusing upon their suffering, think that without training in the Lamrim, I will not able to lead them to enlightenment, and without becoming a refuge myself, I will not be able to give them refuge. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm going to lead them in the prayer. So based on that intention, we recite the prayers. To Sakyamuni Buddha as the founder of the teachings, and then also you will see there's verses in relation with the Dharma and the Sangha jewel. So take that into mind and then recite prayer in front of the Buddha. To the founder, the down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the complete, perfect, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, God to know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete and fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate make offerings of reference. To the founder, the down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, God to know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete and fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate no can go for refuge. To the founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, God to know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate make offerings go for reference. When I was supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you played out in 7 strides, and then I'm supreme in this world. To you, O wise stand and prostrate, with pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you prostrate. With the supreme science, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you prostrate. Thus really like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the founder having all understanding. The field of merit is quoted like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to dustness, I prostrate. The purity that frees from attachment, the virtue that frees from the lower realms, the one path, sublime, pure reality, the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified to realizations, who are devoted with the moral precepts, to the sublime community attending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma Refuge, homage to the Great Sangha, to all 3 ever devote homage. To all worldly of respects, bound in bodies, as many as all realms and all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visible vibration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, to talk or do or bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, seek on distant things as such. To this merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the full faults, and be delivered from the star ocean, perturbed by the waves, aging, sickness, and death. I prostrated are their triple gem, this I heard at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on the mass of virtuous mountain in Rajki together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration of characteristics of ground perfection. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Abhidhisvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty in nature. Then, to the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, how should any son of the lineage train the wishes to practice activities of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said to the Venerable Shariputra, Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice activities of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, and correctly repeating, beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty in their nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is no other than form, and form is also no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not free, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no element up to and including no mind element and mental conscious element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, and up to including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similar, there's no suffering, origination, cessation, and pause. There's no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas will lie and dwell in perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifest complete awakening to the unsurpassed, perfect, complete light, in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to non-equal, the mantra that already pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it's not false. The mantra of the foundation is declared, Tayata, Gata, Gata, Paragata, Parasamgata, Bodhisattva. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that one should practice the profound wisdom, just as you indicated, even Dalai rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding there entirely, along with the words of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandhas, were overjoyed and highly praised, spoken by Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of Dakinis of the 3 chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By a clairvoyance, by powers of a clairvoyance and measuring nature, look and practice like a wonderful chant. Akasambhara sasana. Akasambhara sasana samaraya piya tayata gata gata paragata parasamgata bodhisattva. By the teachings of the 3 sublime jewels possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer transcendence be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified in the glory and so on. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified, and may the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified, and may we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. May all enjoyments be accordance with the Dharma, and may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Foundation of all good qualities. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure Guru. Correctly devoting to him is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon it with great respect. Understanding that the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once is greatly meaningful and difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate a mind that unceasingly day and night takes its essence. This life is impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like the shadow follows the body, the result of black and white come and follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful, to abandon even the slightest negativities and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain and cannot be relied upon. Recognize these shortcomings, please bless me to generate a strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by this pure thought, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teaching is the vows. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, so have all modern migratory beings. Please bless me to see this and train the supreme bodhicitta, be the responsibility of free migratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but do not practice the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, please bless me to practice the Bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once I pacify distraction to wrong objects and correctly analyze the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly within my mind stream the unified path of calm abiding and special insight. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the basis of accomplishing the 2 attainments is keeping pure vows and samadhi. I've become firmly convinced of this. Please bless me to protect these vows and visualize my life. Then, having realized the importance of the 2 stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up the 4 sessions, please bless me to realize the teaching of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the Gurus show the noble paths and the spiritual friends who practice ever long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely our outer inner hindrances. In all my lives, never be separated from perfect Gurus. May I enjoy the magnificent Dharma. By completing the qualities of stages and paths, may I quickly attain this state of Vajrayana. Dola penje sangye roba sho sangye chodang soni tsana. Janjo badu dani gyasu dagi chuso gebe sona. Dola penje sangye roba sho sangye chodang soni tsana. Janjo badu dani gyasu dagi chuso gebe sona. Dola penje sangye roba sho. 경기 투신 이시에 타와 담지 담아치 담고 쳐지겠네. 고담데라 차사라. Yeah, so most of the teachings on refuge start with one famous quotation. I think it's from the works of Nagarjuna. Also in the beginning of the Lamrem Chema, where you see the same quotation coming up, where it says, so that means that all those who wish liberation, they strive for refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Or another form to translate it is, what is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha? That is the refuge of those who wish liberation. Right. So that's a kind of important aspect of taking refuge. Wish for liberation is one aspect, and then taking refuge in the 3 jewels is another aspect. Yeah, so there's 2 points there. So that those 2 points also refer to the 2 causes for refuge. Yeah, so that also maybe for those who don't know yet, they have to write it down because there are 2 causes for refuge. Right? We go for refuge for a particular purpose and with a particular reason. Yeah, so to go for refuge depends on 2 causes. Yeah, so that means we like to be free of a particular difficulty. That's one, right? There's a very universal kind of interpretation I give now first. And then we have to go in a direction that helps us to go beyond that difficulty or suffering. Yeah, so that's a kind of universal aspect. Yeah, so, for example, you can think, it's not a Buddhist interpretation yet, but you can think if you have difficulties in life, and those difficulties are caused by destructive emotions, then that's one reason of going forward in a particular direction, not wanting those destructive emotions, right? So then you have to depend upon a kind of reference or methods that lead you beyond destructive emotions, right? So there are the two causes on a very universal kind of level. Yeah, so we see there is a kind of thing we don't want, like the destructive emotions, and we go train in a particular method that leads us beyond those destructive emotions. Yeah, so mind training of self-awareness, you know, self-discipline will help us to go beyond those destructive emotions. That's a very universal interpretation of what actually refuge or taking a safe direction actually means, right? So from a Buddhist point of view, what it says in this quotation, it goes a step further. Yeah, because in Buddhist context, as we discussed before, the minimum motivation in order to become a Buddhist practice is the interest in future lifetimes. Yeah? Because this lifetime is extremely short, you know, it's only maybe 80 years. So if you're a little child and you look up to a person who's 80 years, it looks all very long. But when you're past 60, then it's all not that long anymore, right? So it's kind of, yeah, it looks very long, but compared to world evolutions of billions and billions of years, 80 years is like peanuts, right? It's very short. So seeing that as being very short, then you think, oh, I have to develop my mind in the long term, right? So then past and future lifetimes, as we discussed before, in mind and its potential and with karma, and a few other models before, we went into past and future lifetimes quite a bit from the point of view of logic, of Buddhist philosophy, right? And epistemology, that consciousness can only be produced by consciousness itself. And there's no beginning to be found, right? We went over that many times. And from the point of view of scientific evidence of a mind without particular physical brain activity, yeah, we went over near-death experiences, for example, or people in the clear-eyed mind of death meditations when there's no brain activity, but there's consciousness present, you know. So, and research of children remembering previous lifetimes. Yeah, so there's a few things to think about. We discussed quite elaborately previously with regards to the continuity of consciousness, right? So that being the case, if you take something like that into account, then it makes more sense to focus upon a longer term of planning future lifetimes. So that's why the Buddha started with that. And then, well, mainly the development of mental consciousness. Also, those, I don't know if you watched this Holiness teaching this morning, then His Holiness also said the Buddha was not that interested in sensory perception as such, you know. So that's why modern science, they have a lot of things to say about sensory perception. But the Buddha was much more interested in the mental consciousness, right? Because that's what we use in contemplation. And that's what we use in meditation. Yeah. So from that point of view, as Holiness says, the Indian heritage, because, you know, the Buddha was born in the land of India, and in particular, the Buddhist teaching and the tradition of Nalanda has a lot to offer in modern society, you know, because this knowledge of mental consciousness, together with destructive emotions, constructive emotions, is a very, very elaborate and profound system, you know. I didn't read that much of Western psychology, but I don't want to say too much about selling Buddhist philosophy and psychology, but having read a few books in Western psychology and having studied for 2 decades in the Buddhist doctrine, then Buddhist psychology is extremely precise, very well defined, you know. So it was the Buddha's main field, right? Yeah. So that's for yourself to examine. Yeah. So because of that, then training the mind takes time. Yeah. And we saw the existence of past and future lifetimes based on logic, based on scientific evidence, as we discussed quite a few times before. So that means that at first motivation for a Buddhist practitioner already goes to the next life. right? Because this life is extremely short, you know. So so then to put too much emphasis only on this life is not, yeah, we might as well use our energy in a more sophisticated way and think about future lifetimes. So that's exactly why the Buddha talked about it also. And then in particular, what His Holiness also said this morning, from the Indian point of view, in philosophy, then it's more or less accepted mainstream past and future lifetimes, so we don't have to go in depth. But on secular levels, also Buddhism can offer a lot of benefits, right? As we just talked about destructive emotions and constructive emotions. But here we are in discovering Buddhism, so we have to go a little bit deeper to discover what actually are we talking about with refuge from the Buddhist point of view, right? So from the Buddhist point of view, I said it goes a bit deeper and well already focusing upon future lifetimes. So if you want to avoid situations in the future which are not very favorable for training the mind, right? So like the lower rebirths, the states of being born in the animal realm or spirit realm, you know, it's very difficult to progress as a puppy or Dodgy the cat, you know. It's very difficult to get out of that state even, you know. So yeah, it's very difficult. So that means that you try to prevent not falling into lower states of existence in order to progress in a future lifetime, right? So you have a kind of a fear, that's normally how it has been translated, but it's not really fear of freaking out, and it's same with guilt versus regret. We talked about it quite a few times, that the real regret is kind of, oh, I did something wrong. You know why you did it wrong, right? And then you confess, you purify, and you move on. You're not stuck with that guilt feeling, because that's not really bringing any benefit at all. That's not constructive, right? So here is the same thing. You know, the fear is not the fear that you're freaking out and your mind loses its clarity. No. It's kind of, okay, if I be born in one of those states of lower states of existence, like animal or spirit or something like that, you know, it will be very difficult to progress in the stage of path to enlightenment. Yeah, that's what we call talking about, that kind of reasoning that generates this kind of not wanting, or we translate sometimes as fear, not try to avoid those states, right? So that's one cause of taking refuge. And then seeing that the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, they give us methods, you know, to not fall in those low states of existence. As we saw in the previous module about karma, how to abandon negative states, how to abandon the 10 non-virtues. If you abandon the 10 non-virtues, you practice a kind of morality. Yeah, so practicing morality is one of the main causes for precious human rebirth, right? It's one of the main causes is practicing morality together with the stillness prayer, to make a prayer not to be born in this lower states of rebirth and born higher. So there's two causes here for refuge. One is the fear of not wanting, you know, to be born in the lower states of existence. That's one, you know, that's from our side. And then there's the faith or aspiration or the understanding that the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha can help us not to fall in those lower states of existence, right? So there's two causes there for taking refuge. You see that? One is the fear from the lower states of existence, and the other one, not only the suffering, but also not able to bear the suffering of those lower states of existence. That's also included, right? But also not able to progress in those lower states of existence. Yeah, that's one cause. And then the other cause is seeing that the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha has the potential or the possibility to lead you beyond those states in future lifetimes, right? Yeah, so that's a kind of the two causes for refuge from the point of view of the small scope of the Lamrim, right? So small scope means wishing a precious human rebirth in a future lifetime. Yeah? So that's one way of taking refuge with two kind of causes, right? So the fear of the lower realms, you have to contemplate well, to understand the suffering. So it's not included in the Discovering Buddhism, though there's one model called Samsara and Nirvana. But in order to get to this point of the fear of the lower realms, you have to contemplate a little bit about the suffering of being born as an animal or as a spirit, something like that. So yeah, that's a part of the training. And then you can see you generate a kind of real, genuine kind of feeling of not wanting to be born in the lower stage of existence, right? That's then the stronger that understanding is, the stronger your cause for refuge becomes. You see that? Same if you have a problem in life and you really want to solve that problem, if you're really convinced about, the drawbacks of the problems, you're looking for a method to get out of it, right? Yeah, so here, same thing. So the stronger your understanding is of the suffering of the lower realms, the stronger that cause of refuge becomes. Yeah? And then you have to check if the 3 jewels of refuge have the possibility to lead you beyond that stage of suffering of the lower realms, right? So then we take refuge in the Buddha, who himself passed beyond suffering, right? And not only he himself passed beyond suffering, but also is very skillful in teaching disciples of different levels, according to their intelligence, according to their interests, And then also the Buddha doesn't differentiate between friends, enemies, or strangers, right? And the Buddha also doesn't differentiate between those who please him or may give him offerings, or those who harm him, So that's a kind of 4 qualities, so to say, of an object of refuge, right? That they are free of these kind of difficulties, of the lower states of existence. They're free of afflictions, right? Yeah, so that's the first level. They're free. You can write down also if you want to, because that comes back again and again in the other 2 refuges I'm going to explain. So the Buddha is free of afflictions, and that's also why the Buddha is free of suffering, right? Then the second one is that he is very skillful in teaching the Dharma in a very gradual path, So that's the second qualification, so to say. Then qualification 3 and 4 talks about compassion, right? That the Buddha doesn't make a distinction between those who are close and those at a distance, or those who are friends and those who are enemies. The Buddha sees all those individuals as equal, right? That's number 3. And number 4 is then that the Buddha, it doesn't matter even if a person harm the Buddha or benefit the Buddha will treat both of them equally. Same you see with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. If you just depend on his teachings, he says sometimes if you contemplate emptiness again and again, it looks like afflictions don't arise. His Holiness says, right? So that's kind of in relation to the first point. Yeah, the Buddha has eliminated all afflictions, right? And then when you see His Holiness teaching very skillfully, when he teaches in-depth philosophy to the monks, it will be slightly different as the presentation this morning. This morning was very general, though there were very good questions from the side of the Indians, but His Holiness teaches in accordance with the level of the audience. Yeah, so the Buddha does the same thing. Yeah. Then also the Buddha, like His Holiness, doesn't differentiate, make a difference between friends or enemies. The Buddha and His Holiness, they treat each and every being equal. Once seeing the president of the US and answering a question of a college student, and then time was pressing, and then the security said, we have to move, we have to go. And then His Holiness says, if I can't answer the question of this the students from this college, because I have to see the president, then I make a distinction between a normal student and an important person, so to say, and I cannot call myself the Dalai Lama anymore. So he answered the question before leaving, you see. So also Buddha doesn't make a distinction between friend or enemy, right? Then number 4, the Buddha doesn't make a distinction between those who benefit him or those who harm him. right? So same thing is Holiness sees the Chinese as the same as people who come and making offerings every day. You know, sentient beings who need to be free from suffering, you see? So that's why if an object of refuge has this kind of qualifications, then we can trust, right? That's what it is. You know, if you have a sickness and we go to a doctor who is not capable of curing us, then it's very difficult to trust. Yeah. Or a person who smokes a lot, him or herself, and tells you, don't smoke, it's not good for you. That doesn't have a real impact, right? So that means that, you have to have an object or person who's capable, you know, of leading you. So that's kind of, qualification of the Buddha. And the same thing, the Dharma also should have methods, right, that lead you beyond the problems. Otherwise, you cannot rely upon those methods. So that means that if you rely on the Dharma, and as we saw in the previous model about karma, the real advice of after taking refuge is basically following law of cause and effect, understanding karma, right? So the Buddha cannot give you a pill, the blue one or the red one or another color, and all your problems will be solved, right? That's not possible. So the Buddha can show you the path. Yeah. So, and that's with the Dharma jewel, the second jewel of refuge, right? So the Dharma jewel basically, from a kind of simplified aspect, explains to us that, you know, we can subdue the mind, we can eliminate afflictions. Yeah. So the methods I've been giving in the Dharma jewel, that's a very simplified aspect of the Dharma jewel. We go in more depth later on, but then you know how to relate to that first of all, right? So the Dharma refuge, or taking refuge in the Dharma, means taking refuge in a method that leads you beyond the problem, right? So same, in order, if you're sick, you depend upon the doctor, right? And eventually you depend upon a treatment. And you have to check if that treatment, what are the side effects, what are the benefits, and then you decide to take it or not. So with the Dharma jewel, same thing, you check. Does the Dharma jewel have this kind of potentials to lead me beyond suffering? And then in small scope, the suffering of the lower realms, right? Yeah, that's the second jewel of the Dharma, right? And then the Sangha jewel are friends on our path to enlightenment. We cannot do it all by ourselves, so we need to depend on friends. Yeah, they're not just friends, but friends who are beyond, you know, these kind of problems. Yeah, so if you, that's a very, the most universal aspect of the Sangha jewel, you can, just to give you an idea what it refers to, is kind of a person who has a difficulty in life and went through that difficulty in life and is beyond that kind of depression or whatever it is, you know, then can help you so much if you are in that same difficulty, because that person understood, you know, at the time being in the difficulty how it was and now being free of it. So that person can help you much better than another person who is in the same boat, right? Yeah, so that means that's a very simplified one, but the real Sangha jewel are basically Arya beings who also have kind of direct perception of emptiness. Yeah, so you can trust because they have these insights in reality and they have the minds completely subdued. So that's the Sangha jewel, a very simplified way. So there, you can see that we have one cause of the fear of the suffering of the lower realms, right? And then we see that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha gives us the opportunity to not be born in those states in the future. You see that? So there's two causes for refuge. One from our side, that we have the fear from the suffering of lower realms, and we see the potential to have a safe direction of refuge, not to fall in low states of existence, happens by relying upon the three jewels of refuge. You see that? Yeah, that's from the small scope. So you also know that even if you have obtained precious human rebirth, it's not perfect. It's still, you know, we have suffering, as we discussed before, you know, the physical sufferings of birth, sickness, aging, death, you know, and all the mental sufferings of wanting things you don't really get, and always meeting things you don't like, never being satisfied, you know. Yeah, so even as a human being, nothing is perfect. So then you start to contemplate, according to the middling scope of the Lamrim, that you have to get out of this samsara. You have to get out of this cycle of contaminated birth, aging, sickness, and death, right? And that is caused by karma and afflictions. Yeah, so you generate a fear for karma and afflictions. In the sense, you generate a fear for, as long as you have those karma and afflictions, you will be born in samsara, right? So you fear suffering samsara together with its causes, right? So most people in this world, they don't really fear the afflictions. They take refuge in the afflictions. They do the opposite. You know, people with strong attachments, you know, they want more objects. They go in crime and stealing. You know, cyber crime is very popular in these days. Can make a lot of money, and then people think they become happy because of that. So they believe their afflictions. Yeah, but actually, that's not a real refuge, right? So if you really understand that the afflictions and karma are the cause for suffering, and you really understand that aspect well, you're going to do whatever thing is possible to purify negative karma. You're going to do whatever thing is possible to subdue your mind, right? And you're going to do whatever is possible to follow methods that helps you to go in that direction. Yeah, you see that? So that means that refuge in accordance with the middling scope, the next level, is not a fear of the lower realms, but a fear of samsara in general and the individual realms of samsara. Yeah, so you not only fear the suffering of the animal realm, but also you fear the suffering of humans, and the suffering of gods, you know. And though gods don't have real suffering, only on some or time of death, but they have this all-pervasive compounding form of suffering, as we talked about a few times before. That means that as long as you have karma and afflictions, there's a possibility or potential to suffer, right? So if you really understand that well, if you really understand, you know, the afflictions, you will try to do what is possible to get rid of them, right? You see that a little bit? So that's kind of a fear of suffering of samsara and to get rid of its causes. Yeah, so that's one of the causes of taking refuge in accordance with the middling scope of the Lamrim. Yeah, why? Because the middling scope of the Lamrim motivates the person in order to achieve the state of liberation. Yeah, or the state of an arat. Yeah, so renunciation is a mind that wishes liberation for oneself. Right? So what kind of liberation? Liberation from suffering samsara. Yeah, so that's a kind of the first cause for taking refuge according to the middling scope. Yeah, so that means that from your own side you fear the suffering and you want to go beyond that, and that's the reason for taking refuge, right? And then the object of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, they're capable of helping you with that, because the Buddha himself, as we just discussed, those 4 points, right, in relation with His Holiness, is free of afflictions, right? So if you want to get free of afflictions, you have to depend on a person who has some experience with that, right? If you have a sickness and the doctor is not experienced enough, then you go to another doctor, right? You check. So in this way, if we rely upon a person, you know, who is free of afflictions, then we can trust, because this person knows where he or she is talking about, you know. So that's very important, you know. So one story was some people, I don't know, in the West, I don't know, do you believe in spirits? But there was one in Australia, a couple, where, you know, I did when I was young. I don't know where still people do that. You know, you have those kind of games with a glass or with a cross and then with a nail in the center, and then you ask the spirit to come, and then, you know, you ask questions, and then questions will be given. Very interesting. But it can be very dangerous also, because spirits are not a real cause for refuge, you see. So sometimes they have a harmful intent and can cause harm. You know, we did it quite a bit when we were teenagers, actually, but later on people start to advise against it because sometimes things happen. So that means that those spirits, though they have some clairvoyance, but they're not all-knowing, and they don't have compassion like the Buddha. Yeah, so they're not a suitable refuge in that regard. You see that? Yeah, so we have to have, a refuge that we can completely trust, especially the spiritual path. Yeah, so training the mind. So that means that the Buddha is free of all afflictions, right? And he's very skillful in teaching you how to go beyond afflictions and how to achieve the state of nirvana, right? And he doesn't differentiate between friends and enemies, and it doesn't differentiate between those who benefit him or harm him. Yeah, so that's a person we can trust. Yeah, also from scriptural reference, in the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, it talks about why is the Buddha a valid person. It's very interesting. This is a text, these texts on Pramana. They're written by Dignaga and Dharmakirti, who were incredible top scholars in Buddhist epistemology, and they were Buddhist monks. So, but still they were questioning and checking out, is the Buddha a real valid person? And if so, why? You see, that's what the Buddha said, don't accept my teachings out of faith or reference or respect for me. You should analyze these teachings, if it's correct or not. So they did the same thing. And then he came to the conclusion why the Buddha actually is a valid person. Of course, his teachings on ultimate reality can be checked. So those teachings of ultimate reality, with modern scientific findings, they come very close. So that's one reason we can check the validity of the teacher. Another possibility is that out of compassion, that the real compassion, what we just talked about, is for qualifications, not making a distinction between enemy and stranger, or those who benefit or those who harm, is incredible. That's really a person we can trust, right? If you do a business deal and you do a person who's honest, you want to do a business deal with a person who's honest, or you want to do a business deal with a person who's not very honest, then which of the two persons will you decide to make a deal with? It's true, isn't it? Even in business, one of the main pillars for a successful leader, being well researched, is kind of a business leader who is, who is kind of compassionate, has some, of course, mindfulness, that's the main thing to start with, and then compassion and selflessness. There are three pillars in the Potential Project. It was examined like 35,000 leaders on this planet in big companies, and they came to those three pillars, one being compassion and one being selfless. It's very interesting for a successful leader, so same thing. If we want to trust a person who guides us, then we will more likely trust a person who, who we can see has these qualifications, So that's for the Buddha, same thing. Yeah? So if we want to be liberated from samsara, then he not only has to be liberated himself, but also, skillful in the methods. Yeah, so that's and this compassion aspect. So and then from the point of view of the Dharma, if you really on the real Dharma refuge, right, is not just what we just talked about, but the real Dharma refuge is actually a mind that directly perceives emptiness, because that's the ultimate refuge. Because we saw many times that in order to eliminate afflictions together with the seeds, we need to generate a mind that realizes reality, right? So that's the real refuge, you see. It's not kind of a book, that's kind of a conventional aspect. And that's why we always respect books and texts. We don't put texts on the floor or step over them or hang them up in the toilet or something like that, because they are precious. They help us to generate good states of mind. So they should be respected. But the real refuge, the ultimate aspect of refuge, is this kind of direct perception of emptiness, one aspect, right? Because there's the real antidote to its all suffering. And another aspect of real refuge or actual refuge is the truth of cessation, the absence of afflictions in the mind of particular, continue, right? So to be free of afflictions, that's what we like to accomplish, right? So that's the real refuge. We like to accomplish that, you know? Yeah, so persons who are free of afflictions, like the Arya jewel, to a certain extent, yeah, they still have some afflictions, but they're on the paths. And not just on the paths, they have a direct perception of emptiness. Yeah, so Arya Sangha, so to say, the third jewel we can trust are Arya Sanghas who have direct perception of emptiness, who have this Dharma jewel in the mind stream. Yeah, we saw the real Dharma jewel is this direct realization of emptiness. And the persons who have this real realization of emptiness in the mind stream, they be considered the Sangha, the friends we can really trust. You know? Yeah, and then on a conventional level, of course, we have kind of monks and nuns, and then, well, fully ordained ones. Yeah, so from the point of view of a conventional level of the Sangha, then 4 fully ordained monks or 4 fully ordained nuns, they also be considered as a Sangha jewel on the conventional level. Yeah, yeah. And on an ultimate level, the real refuge we take in is a being, you know, who has a kind of direct perception of emptiness in the mind stream. Yeah, so there can be a person on the Bodhisattva paths, there can be a person on the Sravaka or Pracheka paths, yeah, as long as they have direct perception of emptiness. Yeah, so that's from the point of view of the middling scope, how to generate refuge. Then you can also generate refuge in accordance with the great scope of the Lamrim, right? So the great scope of the Lamrim means wanting to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And for that purpose, for all sentient beings, for which purpose? In order to liberate sentient beings, right? So the mind of enlightenment is the main motivation for the great scope. And then you take refuge in the sense of not only fearing samsara, you know, but also fearing the suffering of sentient beings. You know, that you cannot bear the suffering of others. And that's one of the main causes for, you know, as we know, compassion is one of the main substantial causes for bodhicitta, right? So this compassion is also one of the main substantial causes for taking refuge in accordance with the great scope. So then that's the cause from your own side, and then the cause for the ability of the 3 jewels to help you to go beyond that, in the sense to liberate sentient being from suffering, that by depending on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we can achieve the state of a Buddha, right? So by depending on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we can achieve enlightenment. Yeah. So that means by depending on these 3 jewels, you know, they have the capacity, you know, to lead us to that state. You see that? So there's always 2 causes of refuge, right? On the small scope, we saw the cause for refuge from our side is the fear of suffering in lower realms, right? And the potential on the side of the 3 jewels is the methods that leads us not to fall in low states of rebirth, right? So there's 2 causes there, right? Then for the middling scope, there's also 2 causes. One cause from your own side, the fear of the suffering of samsara, and the other cause, that the potential to lead you beyond the suffering of samsara are with the 3 jewels, right? And from the great scope, in a similar way, the fear of sentient being suffering is the cause from your own side. And then from the side of the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, they have the potential to lead you beyond you know, that state, in the sense of helping you to achieve the state of a Buddha, which you can eliminate the suffering of sentient beings. Yeah, you see that? So there's refuge in accordance with the 3 scopes of the Lamrim. Yeah, so that's the first thing that's on my list. You see, I have bullet points. You see? Yeah. Reasons for going for refuge and valid refuge objects. That's the 2 things we already discussed, more or less. Yeah. And the next point, and that's I find most inspiring one. The next one is more inspiring. Yeah, I find very inspiring. One of the 2. Yeah, there's another division of the 2. You ready? Yeah. So you know, we can take refuge like, oh, make prayer to the Buddha and temple and text, and it's all good. But the real refuge, you know, is from within, right? It's your understanding of these two causes, you know. So that means that you go into a temple and, you know, you see that in all religions, you know, not only Buddhist kind of form of faith, but also in the Hindu tradition or Christianity or Islam, you know. People go to a place of worship and make prayer and go back home, and that's it. You know, I saw in Singapore, same thing. I never saw a kind of a Buddhist temple because, yeah, I mean, in India also we have a few, but then it struck me that people go on a Sunday morning, same as going to church. They burn some incense, make prayer Nama Amuftafu, and pray to be born in the Pure Lands, and that's it for the rest of the week. So that doesn't really consider a person to be a Buddhist, to be honest. Same in Christianity, you know. I went to church, actually. My parents were not really interested much. I went a few times just to check it out. You know, very interesting. But the reason why for taking refuge in every religion, right, is to understand that particular religion well, and based on that understanding, you decide to follow a particular method or a particular philosophy, right? It's reason-based. That's very important. You know, so for us Buddhists, I mean, for me as a Buddhist, we have to check, you know, if this is really grounded in these reasons, you know, that you see, okay, there's a problem, and the problem has to be solved, and can it be solved with refuge, with the jewels of refuge has been described? That we have to check. Do those 3 jewels of refuge have the real capacity or not? You know, so that you have to check. Yeah? So from the point of view of your own suffering, according to the milling scope, and the point of view that the 3 jewels have the potential to lead you beyond the suffering, you know, that you can check, right? You can check it out. Does these teachings of the scripture really capable of training in that direction? And are there beings who have accomplished that? It's very important to know. So that's why sometimes I tell a lot of stories about great masters who accomplished different kind of realizations. But it's very important to know, because to see that in the present time, it's still possible to, you know, to have kind of these beings around us. You know, like that's so inspiring to see His Holiness, for example, teaching from experience, right? So that's, yeah, it's very needed in these kind of times to see the benefits coming from these trainings. Yeah, so that helps us to take refuge. So then the next point is we take refuge in the Buddha, like the historical Buddha or teacher. We see the teacher as a Buddha, or we take refuge in the Dharma of these kind of Dharma jewels of direct perception of emptiness or true cessation, the absence of or absence of an affliction, right? And the beings who have these realizations in the mind stream. Yeah? So that's a kind of safe direction already, right? You can see that a little bit. There's a kind of safe direction, right? Safe direction in the sense of to walk away from the afflictions, you see, right? Yeah, so that's a safe direction. So that's what is called causal refuge, from the point of view of the cause. Yeah, so we just discussed 2 causes, and because of that, we have kind of external refuge. Yeah, we take refuge in, like the historical Buddha Sakyamuni, right? Because he taught these teachings, and he was completely free of afflictions and capable of leading us disciples, right? And being completely do it all out of compassion. Yeah, so that's why Nagarjuna also said, you know, in this verse, moved out of compassion, you know, you teach the Dharma. That's very interesting. Yeah. So that's a causal refuge. Yeah, and then also we understand that the direct perception of emptiness eventually, you know, it's very inspiring. So we take refuge in that direction, or we take refuge in direct perception of emptiness, and we take refuge in beings who have that realization. It's kind of an external refuge, right? You can see. So that's why it's called causal refuge. One term. Then more inspiring than that is the next one, which is called resultant refuge. So resultant refuge means you take refuge in a result to come about in the future. in your own continuity of consciousness. You see? So that's even more inspiring. Because if you see the suffering of samsara, and you want to be free of the suffering of samsara, then you take refuge in your own accomplishment of achieving the state of nirvana. You see that? And that's very interesting. That's the real kind of what we call it resultant refuge, because it, in regards with the result to be accomplished in the future, you know. And that's kind of a real refuge that I find very inspiring, because, you know, of course, we depend on the Buddha, we depend on his teachings and the Sangha community, but eventually we have to do it ourselves, right? So the real refuge in that regard is our own accomplishment in the future. You know, you see that? Of becoming a Buddha, which is a Dharma jewel, your own accomplishment of having the realizations of emptiness and the absence of suffering and its causes, which is the Dharma jewel, and becoming an Arya being, which is the Sangha jewel. So in your own continuum to develop these kind of qualifications of the mind, that's a real refuge, right? Or not? Yeah, so that makes sense. So that's why we say Buddhism, we say in Tibetan, it's called Nang Che. Nang means inner. Che means Dharma or phenomena. So inner phenomena or inner Dharma. That means it's a mental training within the continuum of a person, right? It's not going to a statue and make prayers. Of course, we have an altar and statues to inspire us, to inspire us and to help us to go in a particular direction. It's for inspiration, you know, but it's not going to save us completely. You know, we get inspired, and by that inspiration we train, and then it will save us, right? But just making a prayer to a statue is good. There's good merit and, you know, good imprints, but it will not be the actual savior. The actual savior we have to do ourselves, right? So that's what it means. In the resultant refuge, you take refuge in your own development in the future. You see that? So that's a kind of a resultant refuge. Brings great benefit, you know, in understanding what refuge actually means. Safe direction, sometimes we translate, you know, chap, yeah, or being free of problems, you know, to look for a shelter place when it's cold and windy and rainy. You need a nice shelter place. I remember when we were, time for a story, when we were walking in the mountains in Austria. We went to Austria and Switzerland quite a few times when we were young. And my father thought, oh, those youngsters, doesn't matter. I like walking, so they must like it as well. So he took me and my brother. Initially, we were too young to really appreciate those kind of things in nature. But then one day we went on this mountain pass, and it was cold and windy. I think even hail, maybe some wet snow even. And then we went into this hut. So we needed a refuge, right? Because it was cold, windy. And so then we went to this, you have those huts on the mountains, you can eat and drink something. You know? So in those days we went, the weather was not that good, so there was not that many people. So then this lady, quite, you know, well-established lady, so to say, asked us to come inside and say, come in the kitchen because there's warm, because there was a stove of, you know, just using wood, right? I think there was no electricity there. So then it was so nice, you see? There was a refuge. It's a very worldly one, but so nice. And then we had this kind of Jaeger tea, this kind of herbal tea with some rum inside. At that time, I was not a Buddhist, so I was still drinking those things. So it was so nice. And then we didn't like to go down anymore because it was so nice and warm, and, you know, we get a little bit sleepy and still had to go down the mountain, you see. So you see, that's kind of very worldly refuge, but you can relate to that. No? It's kind of a problem you like to avoid, and something that gives you a shelter or that gives you a safe direction, right? Because this, this thing in the mountain is just for that day. It didn't solve all the problems. Because why do we experience suffering with weather conditions? Because of the contaminated aggregates, right? So I was way too young even at that time, the word Buddhism didn't reach my ear yet. So I didn't really understand. So I thought it was a real refuge, that hut, but actually it was not. Yeah, it was just temporary. I think if you drink more of that Jaeger tea, then probably you will notice it's not a real refuge. After the next morning you wake up with a big headache or something. So yes, the suffering of change, you see. So the suffering of change is not really, sometimes people think that something will give them happiness, but it's just the suffering of change, Same here, in the hut you don't want to go out again anymore, but then you have to go out, so the suffering of change. You eat too much or drink too much, and then problems come. So that's not a real refuge, So, but the resultant refuge, the real refuge from the point of view of the results, is it's quite amazing. You can see, right? So your own accomplishment in the future to really understand the mind and then train the mind in that direction, and that's the real refuge. So that's why people end up doing meditations. Why? Because the result of those meditations is giving the real refuge, right? So that's why abandoning the afflictions is gonna really help us, So that if you see all the objects of the sensory perceptions, all the objects of the senses, many people in this planet, they think that is the real refuge. That's gonna make them happy. They are not happy, so they look for happiness, So they have this cyber criminals here. They get so much money, but they don't understand how much suffering they give to others. And they make photographs of themselves, and they have this kind of social media, and they, boost up with cars and planes, and they think they're quite something. But actually, they're not very happy. On the photograph, they smile, but when you meet very wealthy persons in private life, you can see, From the distance, we meet a person and think, oh, this person always smiles. Must be so happy. But when you meet him in person, then you see all the problems coming up, So, So that's not the real refuge, you see, the worldly kind of, wealth or fame. It's not the ultimate kind of, or traveling. People traveling all across the globe, Some people in lockdown, they find it. One of my own teachers make a comment about it. Some people, they find lockdown very difficult, And then he said, yeah, but there's so many people who travel across the world and then they still commit suicide. So that means that, this kind of people travel all across the globe, but still no satisfaction because they don't train the mind, right? So that the real problem is not the external conditions. Yeah? The real problem is the mind. Yeah? So if you understand that well, then you will understand what actually means this kind of inner Dharma, Nangje, or inner phenomena. The real refuge comes from within. So, and then this resultant refuge is a very logical one, that we actually will take refuge in our own development in the future, and not just temporary development, but major developments of getting those realizations. So that's the real refuge. And in order to do that, we depend, of course, on the Buddha, historical teacher, and we depend upon his teachings, and we depend upon the Sangha jewel, the Arya beings. So we depend upon that in that regard. Just look at the schedule. So we have another 20 minutes for tea break, and then after tea break we do a bit more in the meditation. So another thing I want to cover before we have the tea break, maybe what's on the list. Also important to know is the benefits, So in order to take refuge, we have to know the benefits, So also, in order to train your mind in the Lamrim, as we saw previously, we always ask us the question, why do I meditate on this? Remember? And how do I meditate on it? And how do I know I'm doing it correctly? Right? So that threefold advice is extremely important. Why do I meditate on precious human rebirth? Why do I meditate on death and impermanence? Why do I meditate on suffering? It's very important to know. It's for a particular purpose. So, and then also sometimes it talks about the benefits. Remember, meditate on that, and impermanence has different benefits, you know, because that really helps us to generate effort in the path, in our development, right? Yeah, so here also there's benefits of taking refuge. So this is a very Buddhist thing, you know. So it's still discovering Buddhism, but yeah, we have to complete in order to get a good understanding of the Buddhist doctrine. So if a person, that's one thing. So refuge, the distinction between a Buddhist and a non-Buddhist means if that person is going for refuge or not. That's the difference, generally speaking. You know, so you can study Buddhism, as we discussed many times. You can study it, practice it without even being a Buddhist. Yeah, put my own mother often as an example, who, you know, doesn't really openly say she's a Buddhist, but she studies and practices it. Yeah, so you can study and practice Buddhism without becoming a Buddhist, right? That's, the Buddha was very clear about it. Also, His Holiness Dalai Lama is very clear. He says, even with people who take ordination, you know, become monks and nuns, I translated for quite some years, then every year His Holiness addressed the same thing. He said, of course, it's always better to follow the tradition of your forefathers, so to say. You know, if you're Christian, then it's better to remain Christian. If you follow Islam or Hindu philosophy or Jainism or whatsoever, it's better to follow that particular religion. You know, there's no need to change, but you can enhance that understanding of your own religion. It's always much better. Once a group of Christian monks came up to His Holiness after attending many teachings and being really inspired by Buddhism, they say, we want to become Buddhist monks. And then His Holiness says, no, you stay Christian monks. So you can study and practice, but you stay Christian monks. You know, so there's a very clear statement of His Holiness that converting people into a particular religion is not very healthy. You know? But of course, there are exceptions. You know, if a person has a lot of interest, also then he said, look, our translator, and then he pointed to me, he said, he changed his mind, he took a decision, you can do that. So that means that if you have real interest in the Dharma and Buddhism, and after checking it well, then of course you can make a decision, right, to become a Buddhist. Yeah? But that you have to check. Yeah? So it's not converting people to Buddhism is not very healthy. Yeah? So that's why it's very important to check. And also, to become a Buddhist is your own kind of wish, right? It's not somebody else says, oh, you should become a Buddhist. It's not like that. That's not Buddhist by itself. You see that? So it has to come from, even for, you know, for us monks and nuns, there's rituals, you know, kind of to help us to think in a particular way, to make it formal, you know. And also one of the, for the monks and nuns, for example, one of the prerequisites is, are you not forced by somebody else? Is this your own wish? Really? Very interesting. Very interesting. The Buddha made it very clear. So for becoming a Buddhist or not, should become from your own side. Right? So you check, and then, of course, you can make a decision like that. Yeah. So that has to be explained before talking about the 8 benefits of becoming a Buddhist. Yeah, are you ready to read down things or not? Write down, I mean, read, write down. Yeah, you can also find them somewhere online, you know, but yeah. Then keep you busy. If you make notes, it's kind of, you pay more attention sometimes. When I translate for lamas sometimes, then also if there's kind of, how do you call it? Simultaneous translation, then there's no time to make notes. Yeah, because you have to constantly, but it's very good for concentration because you listen and you talk. At the same time, sometimes you have to look at the text as well. So it's a very good practice of concentration. When there's kind of periodic translation, yeah, when the Lama teaches and then stops and then it's your turn to translate it, then also have to make a lot of notes. It keeps the mind focused, you know, so that helps. Yeah. The 8 benefits. So the first one is you become a Buddhist. It by itself has great benefits because you go in a kind of, you know, yeah, it's kind of the summary of benefits. Yeah. So that's, yeah, what I just talked about. The distinction between a Buddhist and a non-Buddhist means, does the person goes for refuge or not, right? Yeah. So that, yeah, it implies, right? If you go for refuge, then well, benefits is you become Buddhist. And then it's a basis for other forms of vows. Yeah, so if you're not a Buddhist yet, you cannot take the vows of a layperson, right? If you're not a Buddhist yet, you cannot become monk and nun, or nun, right? So that means it's a basis, the first step, right? So that means there's a second benefit, because there's great benefits in being monk and nun, or yeah, monk or nun, actually, I should say. So yeah, I don't want to make you nuns and monks, but yeah, there's great benefits, but that we do another time. Yeah. So as a basis, there's benefit number 2. Yeah, the refuge is the basis for other some forms of vows. Yeah, we have, for the lay people, we have a 3 classification of vows. We have the vows for self-liberation, right? It's good to know, actually, those who are interested in spiritual paths later on. So there's 3 levels of vows for the layperson as well. Yeah, so it means the vow of a layperson. Yeah, maybe go that over tomorrow morning or something. Then there's the Bodhisattva vows. You know, if you want to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, and you want to make it more serious, you can take Bodhisattva vows. And then those who aspire to practice Vajrayana, then also there's Tantric vows. So there's 3 levels of vows. So the first level of vow is called Pratimoksha. Prati means individual. Yeah, moksha means liberation. So the vows for individual liberation, or sometimes translated as self-liberation. Yeah, so it means the middling scope of the Lamrim, right? As we talk about, you want to be free of suffering, of samsara, and want to accomplish the state of nirvana, right? Yeah, so that's the middling scope, right? So that is, yeah, in order to train in that aspect, then the Pratimoksha vow is the basis. Yeah, so when we read the foundation of all good qualities in the beginning of the teaching, we also say, you know, the root of the training is a Pratimoksha vow, right? So that's this vow which is aimed on self-liberation. And for that purpose, you can have the lay vows, and you can have the vows of the monastics, yeah, the monks and nuns. So that belongs to the category of the Pratimoksha, or individual liberation vow. Yeah. And then, of course, there's Bodhisattva vows for those who like to aspire to become a Buddha later on. Yeah. You can do that based on the motivation of bodhicitta. And then the Vajrayana vows for a very sophisticated and quick vehicle for those who cannot bear the suffering of sentient beings and want to develop themselves as quickly as possible, and not only want that, but also dedicates a lot of effort in that direction. Then there's a possibility of the Vajrayana practices. Yeah, it has a kind of own, yeah, kind of morality. You also read in the foundation of the God, the root of all attainments is keeping, you know, this morality. Yeah, so that's yeah. So that's the 3 classifications of the vows. Yeah, so belonging to benefit number 2 of after taking refuge, right? So the first one is you become a Buddhist. The second benefit, it's the basis for vows to be established. Yeah? And then number 3, earlier kind of created, you know, obscurations or negative karma, you know, will be purified. Because if you see, if you take refuge and you think about the resultant refuge we just talked about, right? So you take refuge in your own development of achieving Buddhahood or achieving the state of nirvana, that by itself is very, very positive, and that by itself has a purification aspect of purifying negative things you've done in the past, right? So that's this benefit number 3. Yeah? Then benefit number 4 is you accumulate merit. You know, if you go into a positive direction, you automatically start to do virtue more than before, right? Yeah, if you really want to subdue your mind, you apply antidotes to the negative thoughts, you apply antidotes to afflictions, and that by itself, the mind becomes more positive, right? Yeah, so that's in relation to benefit number 4. It's, you will easily accumulate merit. Yeah. Then benefit number 5 is a real Buddhist one. Yeah. Other people, humans and spirits, they cannot really harm you. When you have real refuge, it's very difficult for them to harm. You know? Yeah, there are many interesting stories about that. Yeah. Yeah. You want to hear one story? Yeah. So there's this meditator in the cave, you know, and then the thief comes by. And then this meditator in the cave thought, I'm going to teach this thief a lesson and I'm going to help him, you know. So this thief came by and then he was threatening this meditator again and said, okay, this meditator said, oh, put your hands to the hole and I give you what you need. And the meditator puts his hands to the hole, and that's what happened. The meditator, not the thief, sorry. The thief put the hands through the hole, and then the meditator, you know, from the inside of the cave, bound the hands together like that. So the thief couldn't escape. And then he had a kind of little stick or something. And he said to the meditator, you repeat. Oh, he said to the thief, you repeat. I take refuge in the Buddha. And then he smashed him on the hands. And then the thief was repeating, you know. And then he was repeating again and again and again and again. And then he went, it's a very Buddhist story. Shall I finish or not? So then he went down to the valley, and then there was one, you believe in spirits? If you don't believe in spirits, this story doesn't make sense. You know, sometimes you have this kind of, how do you say it? Places are occupied by spirits. Haunted, yeah, haunted. So there was kind of a haunted kind of bridge. It was famous in that area. So he was sitting on that bridge and he was just reciting, I think refuge in the Buddha, the refuge in Dharma and Sangha, because the hands were still hurting, and that's the only thing that was in his mind. And he didn't get hurt by spirits, you see. It's a very Buddhist story. But there's also other stories about people with some dreams, spirits coming and everything, sometimes can come. So then people take strong refuge, like in His Holiness something, then it stops. Then it happen. There's many stories like that. I have a lot of friends, and then sometimes we talk about these things. And then from experience, you can see that there's great benefits, you know? Yeah. Yeah, so that, beings and cannot really harm you because you have this protection of the same direction, so to say. And the real refuge is this view of emptiness, right? Right? And compassion. So if you really train your mind in emptiness and bodhicitta, then of course, nothing can harm you. So what His Holiness says. When there's harmful beings, I just meditate on compassion. And they disappear. When His Holiness, that's a more story for you. So when His Holiness was invited many years ago in the Kangra Valley, you know, Kangra, near Dharamshala, where His Holiness residence, you know. There's a valley called Kangra, the airport, and little, very interesting Hindu temple and town in that valley. And then there was one, I think, Tibetan family who had a lot of spirit harm, and they asked His Holiness to come and help. And they prepared with rituals and everything on the table, ritual implements, and you know, certain practices that can be done. And then His Holiness came down and said, "Oh, get rid of that table. I don't know that." And then His Holiness just meditated on loving kindness and compassion, and the spirit harm disappeared. You see, so that's the real refuge, and that's the real protection. You know, so Milarepa, same thing. Milarepa just focused upon emptiness and non-duality of bliss and emptiness, and nothing can harm. Yeah, see. Yeah, there's number 5. Then number 6 is you don't fall into lower states of existence. You know, according to the small scope, right? Refuge according to the small scope. And why is that so? Because if you take refuge in the Buddha, then the Buddha said, okay, if you take refuge in me, you know, then if you want to have happiness, then you look at the law of cause and effect. You know, you don't engage in the 10 non-virtues, right? You abandon the 10 non-virtues of not killing, not stealing, not sexual misconduct, etc., as we discussed last time, you know. So then, of course, you don't create causes for suffering of lower states of existence, right? If you abandon those things. So that's very logical. Yeah, so that's, what number? Which number is that? 6. Yeah, no, I just, yeah, very good. Yeah, just make sure people are on track. Yeah. This is number 6. Yeah, you don't fall into lower states of existence. Yeah. Yeah. So then, number 7, you will accomplish your aims. You know, and why will you accomplish your aims? Because obstacle caused by negative karma gets purified, right? according to benefit number 3, and you accumulate a lot of merits, benefit number 4, right? And all that cannot really harm you, then of course you accomplish kind of things, right? And I've seen many things like that. You want to hear one more story before your break? It's very inspiring sometimes, and it helps. You know? So I was in the monastery for 20-something years, and in the early days when we just started, then it was not that easy. So some Westerners came, you know, and then having a Western background, and then living in the monastery at that time with roommates, and you know, the toilets. I won't tell you the story about the toilets, but they were not as my toilet here, for example. They were different. And the showers were sometimes just a water pump outside with a bucket, you know. So then the conditions were really rough. And then for Westerners who came, we thought maybe we have to build something, you know, give good conditions that they stay longer and can study and can benefit others, you know. That was the motivation. So then we asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche for the project. Later also we explained the project to His Holiness. And we were pleased. But to build a building, you need money, right? We monks, we don't have money. We just study and read books and clap our hands in debate, right? We didn't have time to go out to do fundraising. And those days, internet was just developing. So, you know, we didn't have time to do fundraising as such. You know, very interesting. So we have a building with this kind of 15 rooms, a temple and a kitchen and toilet blocks. And of course, you need some money for that, right? You agree? Yeah, you need money. So then we asked the Loche Rinpoche for pujas and Lama Zopa Rinpoche what to do. And then they both Lama said, oh, you can start. You know, you can start. You just do this and this practices. You will be okay. So then we're starting, you see? And then the foundation, there's many interesting stories to that project, but yeah, it becomes very long because we were the architect of the whole building. You know, when we make the foundation, it's just cutting a little bit more soil away and then put your feet on the soil. So, oh, this is stable. No, maybe another feet before we put the foundation down. That's how we built, you see. So then our master plan was one A4 piece of paper, you know, and then photocopy, and then one photocopy for the pipes, one for the electricity, one for where to put pillars. And sometimes the you know, constructor can ask me where I do put pillar, here. It's a very interesting project. Yeah. So, but anyway, you can imagine that we only had a little bit of money to start with, you know. So we did exactly according to what the teachers instructed us to do, and we thought, hope for the best kind of thing. You know, so you build up the foundation, and then the windows, just before you start with the windows, you know, it's just the first part of the wall, right? Yeah, so then we reached that point, and then the money was finished. So then for 2 weeks, we were thinking, we either just close down the project as being not successful, or we get a loan and we maybe never can pay it back. So what do? So my friends who had a few sleepless nights, then he told what to do. You know, but we thought we did everything according to the instruction of our teachers, who we consider as fully enlightened beings. You know, so then you can't believe it. Then on one day, one person walked on the site. We never met before this person, right? Another friend brought him in and said, "Oh, a friend of mine. You know, we're just walking around." And so then he came to the site. It's a very remote place in India, near the forest with elephants and tigers. You know, so he came and walked in the site, and we talked for 10-15 minutes. And then that's the blessing of the Guru, you see. Then he said, what an interesting project you're doing here. I always wanted to do something like this. Can I help in any way? And he offered the completion of the whole building. It's very interesting, you see. So that means that with strong, you know, kind of refuge, then probably these things happen. Not, I don't have this strong refuge, but cause and effect relationships, right? So that's very interesting. Yeah, sometimes inspiring to hear those stories, you know. Yeah, same thing here in Jamyang. You know, we did this project for our new kind of altar, the lineage, right? So of course there has expenses, but then we raised most just within a few pujas we did in Sakarava. You know, so you see, yeah, possible. Yeah. So that means benefit number 7. Yeah, that yeah, aims will be accomplished easily. It doesn't pervade, because sometimes obstacles can come. Yeah, and don't think everything is smooth from now on, because sometimes it's not smooth. Yeah, but generally speaking, that's And then number 8, which is the best benefit, is we become a Buddha quickly. So quickly means, not a few lifetimes, but quite some lifetimes. But it's quite quick compared to eons of world evolutions, right? So so that's the 8 benefits of becoming a Buddhist, right? So you become so are those 8 clear or not? Yeah. Okay, then you have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and you relax and you contemplate the things we discussed, and then we meet again 10 to 20 minutes. Okay, break. Yeah, so 11:50. Yeah, okay, enjoy your break, and enjoy your tea and biscuits, whatever. Yeah, whatever you do in your break, or exercise, I don't know. Yeah, okay, see you soon. Yeah, thank you.